The desert wind carried secrets, swirling grains of ochre and rust across the endless dunes, each whisper a forgotten tale, each gust a memory of empires risen and fallen. But in the heart of the Arabian Peninsula, in the sun-baked lands of the Banu Amr, the wind carried a different kind of secret, one of burgeoning life, of promises yet unbroken, and of a love so profound it would one day challenge the very fabric of existence. It was the 5th year of the Hijra, or perhaps the 6th. The precise count mattered little to the Bedouin tribes, whose lives were marked by the sun's arc and the moon's phases more than any calendar. The sands shifted, and so did time. Yet the human heart remained a constant, a fragile vessel brimming with desires and dreams. On a morning when the air still held the crisp chill of a desert night, a baby boy was born into the esteemed household of Saad, chieftain of a prosperous clan within the Banu Amr. His cries, sharp and demanding, cut through the quiet of the women's tent, and a collective sigh of relief, quickly followed by joyful ululations, rippled through the encampment. Saad, a man whose face bore the noble lines of generations of desert leaders, stood tall outside, his heart swelling with a pride he rarely allowed to show. A son, a firstborn son. He named him Qais. Qais, they said, was destined for greatness. The diviners whispered of a spirit as free as the wind, a mind as sharp as a falcon's gaze, and a heart as vast as the desert sky itself. He grew under the watchful eyes of his tribe, a lively, curious boy who preferred the company of storytellers and poets to the rough-and-tumble games of other children. His imagination was a boundless oasis, fed by the ancient legends of jinn and heroes, and his voice, even in youth, possessed a melodic quality that hinted at the eloquent verses he would one day weave. In a neighboring encampment, belonging to the proud and equally respected Banu Talaba, another birth brought its own profound joy. A girl, with eyes the color of the deepest desert night and hair like spun moonlight, was born to Mehdi, a man of quiet dignity and immense wealth. They named her Layla. From the moment she could toddle, she captivated all who met her. Her movement moved with an innate grace, her laughter a chime of silver bells. Unlike Qais, who yearned for the vastness of the outside world, Layla found solace and wonder in the intricate patterns of her mother's weaving, the fragrant spices of the kitchen, and the hushed conversations of the women. Yet beneath her gentle demeanor lay a spirit as fierce and untamed as any desert mare, a will that, once set, would not be easily swayed. Their worlds, though physically separated by only a few hours' ride across the sun-drenched plains, were distinct. Qais was being groomed for leadership, his days filled with lessons in horsemanship, strategy, and the intricate politics of tribal alliances. Layla, destined to be the mistress of a powerful household, learned the arts of hospitality, management, and the delicate dance of social graces. Yet the sands, ever the weavers of destiny, were already conspiring to bring them together. It began subtly, as all great changes do. The children of the Banu Amr and the Banu Thalaba, by custom, attended the same madrasa, a temporary school erected under the shade of date palms when the tribes gathered near a shared well. Here, under the patient tutelage of an elderly scholar whose beard was as white as the desert salt flats, Qais and Layla would first meet. Qais, then a gangly boy of 10, with an unruly mop of dark hair and eyes that constantly darted, absorbing every detail, found his attention constantly drawn to the quiet girl who sat on the far side of the woven mats. Layla, a year his junior, with her profound dark eyes that seemed to hold untold wisdom, rarely spoke in class, but her presence was a magnetic force. She was a stillness in his whirlwind world, a silent melody that played only for him. He was the boisterous one, quick to answer, quicker to ask, often bursting with a new poem or a clever riddle. She was the observer, her small hands often busy sketching designs in the sand with a twig, her lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. He would often try to catch her eye, to elicit a response, a laugh, anything. But Layla remained enigmatic, a blossoming desert flower carefully guarding its bloom. One scorching afternoon, the old scholar had set a task to compose a short ode to the beauty of the desert. Qais, brimming with verses, finished quickly, his words painting vivid images of golden dunes and resilient gazelles. He glanced over at Layla, who was still hunched over her slate, her brow furrowed in concentration. Impulsively, driven by a desire he didn't yet understand, he leaned over and whispered, "Your verses, Layla, will surely outshine mine, for your beauty, like the desert at dawn, inspires the greatest poetry." Layla's head snapped up, her dark eyes wide with surprise. A blush, faint but noticeable, spread across her cheeks. It was the first time he had ever seen her flustered, the first time his words had pierced her calm exterior. For a fleeting moment, their gazes locked, and in that instant, something shifted, a spark, unseen and unheard by anyone else, ignited between them. It was a recognition, a knowing, a silent acknowledgement of a connection that would soon define their very beings. It was the beginning of an epic that would shake the foundations of their world. The whispers of the sands, which once carried only forgotten tales, now began to murmur a new story, one of Qais and Layla, two souls intertwined by destiny, destined for a love that would transcend the ordinary, a love that would become the very definition of madness and devotion in the annals of Arabian legend. It was a story that would begin in innocence, bloom in secret, and ultimately consume them both. The shared lessons under the shade of the palms could not last forever. As Qais and Layla grew into their adolescence, the rigid lines of tribal separation began to draw tight, pulling them slowly apart. At 12, Qais was no longer merely sad son. He was a young man being actively prepared to assume the burdens of leadership. His days were spent alongside the men, learning the rhythms of the ghazu, raids, the wisdom of the elders in the majlis, council, and the unforgiving economics of the camel trade. He wore the traditional thobe with more dignity and carried the curved dagger with a newly acquired competence. Yet this transformation, which should have filled him with the pride of manhood, felt like a cage. His lessons on strategy and honor were tedious compared to the burning, beautiful distraction that was Layla. Now that he could no longer sit near her in the schoolroom, their meetings became clandestine moments stolen under the vast Arabian sky. Their eyes met across the low fire pits during rare communal feasts where the clans celebrated a peace treaty or a successful hunt. These were electric, heart-stopping encounters. Qais would be performing a duty, maybe serving dates or coffee to the guests, but his world would narrow to the single, luminous spot where Layla sat with the women, her face partially veiled, her presence radiating a calm beauty that drove all rational thought from his mind. For Layla, the transition into womanhood was even more restrictive. Her dark, expressive eyes, once her primary tool for communication with Qais, were now often lowered in compliance with custom. She understood, with a painful maturity, the heightened scrutiny she was under. Marriage negotiations were beginning for girls her age, and her immense beauty made her a particularly valuable commodity in the tribal alliance market. But while the world demanded silence, Qais found his voice. It happened one twilight. The two tribes were watering their flocks at a shared well, the air thick with the bleating of sheep and the lowing of camels. Qais spotted Layla on the far side of the well pit, her back leaning against the ancient sun-warmed stone wall. She looked pensive, her expression mirroring his own desperate longing. He had meant only to exchange a polite greeting, but as he neared, the words of practical life vanished. What erupted was poetry, pure, raw, and utterly unprecedented in the tribe's contemporary memory. He stopped, heedless of the other young men and women around them, and his voice, which had matured into a deep, resonant tenor, began to sing. Layla, my soul, the sun sets on the well, and in your eyes 1,000 stars now dwell. They tell me, speak not, yet my heart must break, for silence is the poison I must take. His impromptu qasida, ode, wasn't polished. It was a flood, a torrent. He sang of the crescent moon being envious of her brow, of the desert rose attempting to mimic her blush, and of the cruel destiny that had placed such a vibrant flame just out of reach. A stunned silence fell over the well. The watering stopped. Everyone turned. Layla stood utterly still, her chest rising and falling rapidly. No man had ever dared address a girl of her status with such public, passionate fervor. The act was a breathtaking defiance of every tribal norm that demanded subtlety and discretion. A part of her was terrified. Another part, the fiercely independent spirit that Qais had always seen, soared. The words he spoke were not merely poetry, they were a direct declaration of ownership over his soul. When he finished, the silence was broken not by applause, but by the nervous murmurs of the elders. Qais, drunk on his own passion and the sight of Layla's overwhelmed face, took a single, fateful step closer. "You are my Layla," he whispered, his voice cracking, "and I am Qais, the lover of Layla." And then his older cousin, Murrah, a practical man with the solid build of a seasoned warrior, gripped Qais's shoulder. "Enough, Qais," he hissed, his face tight with controlled anger. "You dishonor the girl and our clan with this public madness. Control yourself." But the damage was done. The tribe, which valued honor and decorum above all, was scandalized. The word love, when spoken so loudly and publicly, became synonymous with disruption. From that day on, Qais was no longer just Qais. He was labeled Majnun, the madman, or more literally, one possessed by the jinn. The name, first uttered in scorn, was a curse that would become his identity. Mahdi, Layla's father, a man of pride, was furious. His daughter's honor had been publicly compromised. He immediately forbade Layla from leaving their encampment without her chaperones, and most crucially, he forbade all contact with Qais. The desert, which had once been a shared garden of possibility, became a harsh, divided territory. But the separation only deepened the wound in Qais's heart, transforming infatuation into obsession and love into ishq, the sublime, consuming passion that devours the self. Qais began to channel his entire being into poetry. He abandoned his duties, forsook the company of men, and wandered the fringes of the camp, composing verses that grew ever more beautiful, ever more tragic. His poems were no longer just about Layla's beauty. They were intricate philosophical reflections on the nature of love, separation, and the cruelty of societal chains. He would carve our name on rocks, sing his despair to the moon, and send his verses via passing shepherds or sympathetic children toward Layla's tent. The poems became legendary almost instantly. They were passed from mouth to mouth, memorized by travelers, and sung by caravanners as far away as Yemen. Everyone in the peninsula knew of the plight of Majnun,
the poet consumed by his love for Layla. Layla, trapped behind the heavy canvas walls of her father's tent, was tormented. Her heart ached for Qais, but her family's honor and the safety of her entire clan were paramount. She knew that any attempt to meet him would bring shame and possibly violence upon her home. Yet she received his poems, small, precious scrolls or verses sung softly by a visiting cousin. She would memorize every word, her soul finding its reflection in his despair. She was not a spectator to his madness. She was the silent partner in his agony, the hidden heart of his poetry. In the stillness of the tent, Layla wept. You call him Majnun, but it is the tribe that is mad, seeking to separate two souls that the Creator himself bound together. Her mother, sympathetic but bound by tradition, could only shake her head. His words are fire, child, and fire burns down houses. You must forget him. You must prepare for a true life, a life of stability and alliances, not this beautiful, dangerous madness. But Layla knew that her heart, like Qais's, was already beyond saving. The fire of first love had not just ignited, it had taken hold, a consuming blaze that promised to leave nothing behind. The legend had begun, and the world was already bracing for the inevitable tragedy.
The whispers of Majnun's poems soon reached the Majlis, the Council of Elders, where they were received not as art, but as an unbearable provocation. Qais's father, Saad, a man who had navigated a lifetime of desert politics and honor disputes, felt the weight of shame pressing down on him like 1,000 pounds of sand. He summoned his son, Qais, to his tent. The light filtering through the worn canvas illuminated the severity in Saad's face. Qais, his father began, his voice low and trembling with contained anger. You have abandoned your duties. You wander the dunes speaking nonsense. You have taken a noble, ancient tradition, poetry, and turned it into a weapon of self-destruction. And worse, he paused, his eyes narrowing, you have publicly slandered Layla, the daughter of Mahdi, by clinging to her like a beggar to a cloak. People now call you Majnun, the afflicted one. Do you understand the disgrace this brings upon our house? Qais stood tall, yet his gaze was distant, not fixed on his father, but on some invisible horizon. Father, he replied, his voice calm, which only infuriated Saad further. The only disgrace is that which separates two souls bound by destiny. My love is not slander, it is the truth. It is the language of God written upon my heart. You call my words nonsense, but they are the only things that make sense in a world that values camels and alliances over the purity of feeling. Saad's hand clenched into a fist. He'd expected remorse, perhaps a promise of discretion. Instead, he got a sermon from a boy who spoke of divine love. Enough of this pre-Islamic nonsense, Saad roared, invoking the newly ascendant social order that prized piety and order. You will cease this madness, you will attend to your responsibilities. You will forget this girl, or I will consider you an enemy of the Banu Amr. Qais merely smiled, a profound, heartbreaking smile. I can no more forget Layla than the sun can forget the dawn. If forgetting her is the price of your approval, then I choose the wilderness. Realizing threats were useless, Saad resolved to seek a solution that tradition demanded. He would offer a formal proposal for Layla's hand in marriage. This was not born of empathy, but pragmatism. Securing the alliance would silence the rumors, restore Layla's honor, and most importantly, cure Qais of his dangerous public obsession by transforming the forbidden into the permissible. He gathered his gifts, the finest desert horses, the plumpest sheep, and a generous dowry of gold and silver, and with a delegation of respected elders, he rode to the camp of Layla's father, Mahdi. The atmosphere in Mahdi's tent was stiff, draped in the tension of a long-standing grievance. Mahdi, a severe man whose dignity was everything, received Saad politely, but with a coldness that chilled the air. Saad made his formal request, speaking with all the eloquence and humility a chieftain could muster. presenting his son Qais as a man of noble lineage, a talented poet, and a suitable match. Mahdi listened silently, his dark eyes observing the bounty of the dowry. When Saad finished, the silence in the tent was absolute. "Saad, my esteemed neighbor, I respect your lineage and your wealth, but my answer is no." The refusal stunned the delegation. The dowry was substantial, the alliance beneficial. "Why?" Saad demanded, his face reddening. "My son is a man of honor, and his love, though perhaps too passionate, is sincere. You know the laws of the desert. Marriage cures such passions." Mahdi leaned forward, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Your son, Qais, has done the unforgivable. He has called my daughter Layla's name across the dunes. He has made her a commodity of public gossip. He has stained her honor with his madness. No family of dignity would accept a man who has acted as a Majnun for their daughter. I would rather see Layla married to a black slave from the mountains than to a renowned madman, for the slave is a man of discretion, and your son is a man of disgrace." The insult was profound, calculated to cut Saad to the core. The refusal was not about love, wealth, or lineage. It was about the supreme importance of reputation and social order in the tribal world. Mahdi was not just rejecting Qais, he was rejecting the very concept of a love that defied discretion. Saad and his delegation returned defeated, their shame now twice as heavy. When Qais heard the news that his love had been publicly branded a source of dishonor, the fragile cord connecting him to the rational world finally snapped. Layla, hearing the hushed accounts of the meeting from her mother, felt her world shrink. She knew her father's decision was irreversible, and the knowledge brought a crushing despair. Her soul yearned for Qais, but her body was now utterly trapped by the iron bars of her father's wounded pride. Qais did not weep or rail against his father. Instead, he simply walked away. He shed his fine garments, replacing them with a rough, tattered tunic. He abandoned his tribal home, his inheritance, and his identity. He walked out into the desert, the wild, vast Rubal al-Hali, the empty quarter, where the only company was the wind and the silence. He no longer sought Layla's presence. He sought the company of the animals. He spoke to the gazelles, wept with the wolves, and befriended the mountain goats. His body became lean, his hair matted with sand, and his eyes burned with a singular, terrifying focus. He still composed poetry, but it was no longer addressed to Layla the girl. His verses were now addressed to Layla the idea, to the ishq itself, to the divine, unattainable beauty that had driven him mad. He was no longer Qais, the son of Saad. He was truly, irrevocably, Majnun. The legend of Layla and Majnun, born of a whisper in a schoolroom, had now been cast into the eternal, unforgiving crucible of the desert. The storm had broken, and the wind carried only the sound of Majnun's beautiful, tortured verses. Majnun's retreat into the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter, was not an escape from sorrow, but a deep immersion into it. He did not fear the harsh environment. He embraced it as a mirror for his inner desolation. The desert, unforgiving and boundless, became his true home, his solitary mosque, and his only audience. His sanity, as defined by the Banu Amir, was utterly gone. Yet, his mind was lucid, focused with the pinpoint intensity of a mystic. The world of men, with its rules, its titles, and its emphasis on property, had rejected his love, so he rejected its reality. He began to embody his name, Majnun, the one possessed. The lines between Qais, the noble youth, and the jinn-afflicted poet blurred until they ceased to exist. He ceased eating food prepared by human hands, subsisting on wild roots and sour camel milk left by shepherds. His skin grew leathery, his clothes were reduced to rags, and his gaze was unsettlingly bright. But the poetry, that was the miracle. The more his physical self withered, the more his art flourished. He no longer wrote with ink on parchment, but carved his verses into the smooth white stones of the wadis, traced them on the sand with a stick, or simply recited them to the wind. His poems weren't just lamentations. They were profound, intricate, philosophical tracts on the nature of divine love, ishq ilahi. He didn't just sing of Layla, he sang to the idea of Layla. They call me mad for Layla, but I swear, I seek not Layla's body, nor her hair. I seek the essence, the pure, brilliant light that makes her Layla beautiful and rare. His reputation as a living oracle spread rapidly. Travelers, far from treating him as a vagrant, began to seek him out. They came from distant tribes and bustling towns like Mecca and Yathrib, drawn by the power of his verses. They would find him surrounded by a silent retinue of desert animals, gazelles resting their heads on his lap, a lone wolf watching from a respectful distance. It was said the beast recognized the purity of his heart. These visitors would record his newest poems, carrying them back as precious treasures. His verses became the lament of every star-crossed lover, the meditation of every Sufi seeking unity with the divine. His suffering had given birth to eternal art, and ironically, the man who had been rejected for dishonoring his beloved had immortalized her name forever. While Majnun found a kind of tragic freedom in the wilderness, Layla endured a different, suffocating kind of torment. She was a captive in her own home, her movements restricted, her future dictated by the pride of her father. Layla's father, Mahdi, was now doubly determined to secure an honorable marriage for his daughter to erase the stain of Majnun's public passion. Soon a new suitor arrived, one whose proposal was impeccable in the eyes of the tribe. Ibn Salam, a man of great wealth, impeccable manners, and powerful political connections from a neighboring clan. He was the very model of tribal discretion and stability, everything Majnun was not. The proposal was accepted immediately by Mahdi. Layla, watching the transaction from behind a screen, felt a cold dread settle in her heart. She was a prize to be traded, a jewel to secure an alliance, and her feelings were irrelevant. Her mother, seeing Layla's silent distress, begged her to consider the practicalities. Ibn Salam is a good man, Layla. He offers you comfort, security, and the respect of all. Majnun offers you only rags and madness. Layla finally spoke, her voice thin but resolute. Mother, comfort without Kais is a tomb. My soul is already married. How can my body follow another? It is not Ibn Salam I pity. It is his fate to marry a woman whose heart is a deserted well. But tradition was an unbreakable law. Layla had no power to refuse. The arrangements were made, the wedding date was set, and the gold of Ibn Salam's dowry was counted. In a last desperate act, Layla managed to smuggle a message, a tiny scroll hidden in a loaf of bread, to a shepherd who frequented Majnun's desert haunts. It contained only 2 lines, written in her elegant hand. They take me now, a prize against my will. Know this, my love. My heart belongs to you still. The wedding day arrived, a grand, colorful spectacle designed to erase all memory of Majnun's disgrace. Feasts were held, musicians played, and Layla, shrouded in silks and gold jewelry, was prepared for her new life. Yet, as the bridal procession began its journey towards Ibn Salam's distant camp,
Layla rode not in joy, but in silent protest. Her veil concealed the tears that traced silent paths down her cheeks, and her body, though present, was already absent. Miles away, Majnun received Layla's message. The impact was cataclysmic. He did not roar or rage. He simply sank to his knees in the hot sand, the parchment crumbling in his hand. The news, the ultimate irreversible separation, shattered the delicate balance of his madness. His love, which had been a beautiful, abstract concept, was suddenly dragged back to the agonizing, tangible reality of Layla's physical capture. What followed was his most famous and most disturbing poem. He stood up, addressing the heavens and the earth, his voice echoing across the silent dunes. Layla is wed. Now stone you must turn stone, and sky you must weep blood for her alone. How can the vessel hold two spirits in? Layla is his, but Majnun's from within. His sorrow manifested physically. He began tearing at his clothes, his hair, and finally his own flesh. He sprinted into the deepest desert, running until his body collapsed from exhaustion and thirst. Saad, his father, who had been secretly keeping a constant watch over his lost son, found Majnun in the state. Horrified, the old man gathered his weakened son and for the first time in years attempted to bring him back to the world. He tried a new desperate tactic. He led Majnun to the Kaaba in Mecca, the holiest site in Arabia, and commanded him to pray. Son, beg God to cure you of this destructive love. Ask him to replace Layla's image with faith. Majnun, surrounded by the solemn pilgrims, knelt. But when he spoke, his prayer was the final declaration of his eternal allegiance to Layla. "O Lord," he cried, "not to be cured, but to be confirmed. They tell me to seek freedom from Layla's grace, but I beg of you, intensify my pain, increase my love, and never let it wane." The pilgrims gasped. Saad finally understood. His son was not merely in love, he was a conduit for a celestial, destructive passion. Defeated and recognizing the true spiritual nature of his son's affliction, Saad brought Majnun back to the perimeter of the desert camp, where he would leave him food and water, finally accepting that his son's soul belonged to Layla and the wilderness. The mad poet was now fully a prophet of love.
Layla's arrival at the camp of Ibn Salam was met with celebration. Yet, within the luxurious confines of her new tent, the silence was deafening. She carried herself with the dignity of her noble birth, performing the rituals of the bride with a chilling detachment. She had exchanged the simple canvas of her father's home for embroidered silks, but she knew she was merely a magnificent prisoner. Ibn Salam was everything his reputation promised: kind, wealthy, and respectful. He was genuinely captivated by his new bride, but he was also acutely aware of the ghost that haunted their marriage, the shadow of Majnun. On their wedding night, Layla met her husband with the same distant composure she had maintained throughout the journey. When he approached her, his eyes filled with gentle expectation, Layla spoke for the first time since the ceremonies concluded. "Ibn Salam," she said, her voice soft but firm, "you have honored my father, purchased my hand, and given me a life of security. I thank you. But my soul, my essence, the very fiber of my love, is not yours to take. It resides far away, wandering the dunes with the man you call mad." Ibn Salam, a seasoned merchant and diplomat, was staggered by her directness. He had anticipated shyness, perhaps even reluctance, but not this absolute spiritual denial. "Layla," he replied, attempting to reason, "Gais is a ghost, a starving vagrant whose mind is broken. He has abandoned the world. I am here, present, a man of flesh and honor. Allow me to heal your heart and teach you a new, secure love." Layla shook her head slowly. "You do not understand, honored husband. Gais is mad only to those who prize the world above the soul. For me, he is the only sane man left, for he values love above all else. He is Majnun, the possessed one, but the jinn that possesses him is the jinn of Ishq, pure, divine passion." She drew a boundary that night, one that was absolute and devastating. She did not threaten him or raise her voice. She simply stated an immutable truth. "If you attempt to touch me, to take a body that belongs only to the poet in the wilderness, I swear by the honor of my tribe, I will take my own life. I am yours in name only. My spirit is bound to Gais." Ibn Salam was faced with an impossible choice. He could force the issue, asserting his rights as a husband under the law, thereby risking a scandal far greater than Majnun's verses and possibly driving his beautiful bride to suicide. Or he could respect the sanctity of her vow, maintaining the outward appearance of a normal marriage while enduring the profound agony of an empty union. A man of honor, he chose the latter. The marriage was never consummated. Layla and Ibn Salam lived under the same roof, sharing meals and conversation, but they slept in separate corners of the vast tent. Their marriage became a silent, living monument to the power of Majnun's passion. Ibn Salam became Layla's guardian, her protector from the world, and the unwitting victim of a love he could not conquer. Meanwhile, Majnun's existence in the desert grew more mystical. His father, Saad, continued to leave food and water at his usual haunts. Sometimes Qais would accept the supplies, other times he would refuse, saying his true nourishment came from the very essence of Layla's memory. The stories and verses of Majnun had now cemented his status as a legendary figure across the entire Arabian Peninsula. Rulers, poets, and mystics sent emissaries to observe him. One such man was Nawfal, a powerful chieftain and warrior, a man whose word commanded armies. Nawfal, captivated by the pure tragedy of Majnun's poetry, finally sought him out. He found the poet frail, his eyes luminous, singing to a herd of frightened wild cows. "Majnun," Nawfal called out, "I am Nawfal, and I have come to save you." Majnun paused, tilting his head. "Save me from what? From love? That is not salvation, it is eternal death." Nawfal was direct. "I will not let a poet of such immense talent waste away for the vanity of a single woman. I will ride to Mahdi, Layla's father. If he refuses my demand, I will ride against him with my entire force. I will take Layla by force and deliver her to you." Majnun, for the first time in years, reacted with violence. He threw a handful of sand at Nawfal. "Stop! You fool! You cannot understand. Layla is no longer the Layla of flesh. To win her by violence would ruin the very soul of our bond. My Layla is pure, untouched, an image of the eternal beloved. To force her here, soiled by the dust of battle and human desire, would destroy her." He fled, leaving the powerful chieftain utterly bewildered.
Nawfal did not want Layla's body. He wanted the idea of her. Yet Nawfal, convinced his warrior logic was superior, carried out his threat. He did ride against Layla's tribe, defeating Mahdi in several skirmishes and demanding Layla be freed to marry Qais. Mahdi, utterly humiliated, was forced to confront his pride. He finally confessed the whole painful truth to Nawfal. Layla was married to Ibn Salam, and by the strict laws of the desert, only death could break that vow. Nawfal, bound by respect for the law of marriage, was forced to withdraw. The failed war had one devastating consequence. Though Layla's honor was now partially restored by a powerful chief's defense, the conflict merely solidified her captivity, and it brought the ultimate realization to Majnun. Layla was eternally beyond his reach in the physical world. This news, paradoxically, brought him a new, final clarity. He was completely free to pursue his ishq without the distraction of hope. Majnun became not just a man who loved Layla, but the very embodiment of pure, self-sacrificing love. He was the saint of the desert, the Majnun Layla, and his fame ensured that the world would never forget the name of the woman who drove him to celestial madness.
Years passed, marked by the cycles of the sun and the waning of Majnun's mortal strength. He had moved further into the deep desert, his legend growing with every passing caravan. Layla, the silent wife, remained imprisoned in the gilded cage of Ibn Salam's home, her beauty fading slightly, replaced by a profound spiritual sadness. Their worlds seemed destined to remain parallel, their souls connected only through the ether of poetry, until a shepherd, known for his kindness and his quiet sympathy for the mad poet, orchestrated a final poignant encounter. The shepherd visited Layla's camp under the pretense of selling fine wool. He found Layla sitting alone, staring at the intricate patterns of the woven rugs, her face a mask of sorrow. He recognized the depth of her pain, for he had just spent a night listening to Majnun sing his verses to the moon. "Mistress Layla," he whispered, bowing low, "I know of a place, a remote wadi, where the well is dry but the heart is full. I know of the one you seek. I can arrange a meeting." Layla's breath caught. The idea was terrifyingly dangerous. To meet Majnun, the Majnun of the wild, the man of the beasts, would be the final act of defiance. Yet the longing in her heart was a physical ache she could no longer bear. "Tell me where," she commanded, her voice fierce with sudden resolve, "and tell no one." The rendezvous was set near a cluster of old, gnarled acacia trees, a lonely outpost where the desert met the foothills. She slipped away at dawn, muffled in a heavy cloak, accompanied only by a trusted servant girl. The ride was long and silent, each hoofbeat counting down the final moments of her life as the world knew it. When she arrived, she saw him. Majnun was sitting beneath the largest acacia, his back against the trunk. He was almost unrecognizable. His frame was skeletal, covered in tattered animal skins. His long hair was a tangled mess, and his face was etched with years of exposure and spiritual agony. Yet his eyes, those magnificent burning eyes, were clear, luminous, and fixed on a single distant point. Around him lay his silent court, 2 gentle gazelles, a few nervous birds, and an old, scarred mountain goat. Layla dismissed her servant and walked forward alone. Majnun, seemingly lost in meditation, did not stir until she was standing a few feet from him.
Then one of the gazelles rose, sensing her presence, and nudged Majnun's hand. He turned his head slowly. His eyes met hers. For a moment, all time stopped. She saw the Qais she remembered, the bright, passionate boy from the madrasa, trapped behind the cracked mirror of the madman. "Qais," she whispered, the name, a painful, barely audible sound. Majnun looked at her. He saw the beautiful woman in fine, though dusty clothes. He saw the sorrow in her eyes, the burden of her life. But this was not the image his soul had worshipped. He recoiled slightly. "And Layla?" he asked, his voice a dry rasp laced with confusion. "Is it truly you, the Layla of the tribes?" She moved closer, weeping openly now. "Yes, my Qais, my beloved, look at me. I am here, Layla. I escaped my bonds to see you one last time." Majnun scrambled back a foot, startling the animals. He held up a bony hand, stopping her advance. "No, no," he murmured, shaking his head. "You are not my Layla. You are too real, too much of this world. My Layla, the one I have sung to, the one I have starved for, is an essence, a reflection of the divine, purified by distance and pain. She is a concept that lives in my verses, not a woman of flesh and blood." Layla's heart shattered. She had sacrificed everything for this moment, only to be rejected not by a rival, but by his own transcendent madness. "The Layla who stands before you is the vessel that holds the spirit you love. I have never betrayed you. My marriage is a lie. My body is untouched. I have been loyal to your love." Majnun sighed, a sound like sand shifting. "Your loyalty is what made the dream real, and your prison is what gave my poetry flight. But now you are here and the dream is broken. Look," he pointed to her face, "your beauty is shadowed by sorrow. Your hands are soft from ease. My Layla is perpetually young, forever laughing, forever unattainable." He stood up, tall and spectral, and looked past her towards the horizon, his true home. "Go back, Layla, to the man who can give you shelter. I must return to my Layla, the one who waits for me in the infinite reaches of my soul. We must maintain the distance, for it is the only way our love can remain pure and eternal." He turned, and with a silent wave of his hand to dismiss the real Layla, he walked deeper into the desert, followed by his retinue of animals. Layla stood alone under the acacia tree, utterly defeated, but with a terrible new understanding. Qais was lost to the world forever. The legend had consumed the man. She was married to Ibn Salam, and her heart was wedded to a phantom.
The years that followed were slow, heavy stones, marking the relentless march toward destiny. Layla lived a life of grace and quiet service to her husband, fulfilling every duty except the one demanded by a wife. Ibn Salam, though heartbroken by her continued distance, honored his initial vow, respecting the spiritual barrier she had erected. Layla's health, however, began to fail. Her spirit, exhausted by the lifelong strain of denial and separation, began to loosen its hold on her body. The physician could find no ailment, but Layla knew the truth. Her physical self was simply following the path of her soul, which had long since fled to the desert with Majnun. She died peacefully one cool evening, her final breath a whispered verse of Qais. Ibn Salam wept genuine tears. Though she had never been truly his, he had loved her constancy and the profound dignity of her refusal. He gave her a funeral fit for a noblewoman, burying her in a quiet spot near her family's former encampment, marking the grave with a simple, unadorned stone. Word traveled slowly across the vast desert, carried first by a wandering poet, then confirmed by a caravan. The news of Layla's death reached Majnun's ears a moon later. This time, there was no burst of violence, no philosophical rant. The news was merely the fulfillment of his life's journey. The vessel was broken, meaning the essence was free. He spent days in absolute silence, rejecting even the water his father had left. Finally, he walked the long, arduous journey back toward the heartland of the tribes, his footsteps guided by a profound magnetic pull. He found Layla's fresh grave. Majnun did not cry. He fell upon the grave, embracing the cold earth that covered her body. He whispered not new poems, but the verses of his youth, the innocent odes he had first written in the madrasa, before the world branded him a madman. He remained there for days, a vigil of complete stillness. Passers-by saw him, but none dared approach the sacred finality of his grief. Finally, one morning, Majnun's father, Sa'ad, came to the grave to bring him food. He found Majnun lying motionless, his arms still wrapped around the stone, his eyes closed. He looked peaceful, healed of his decades-long torment. He was utterly frail, nothing more than sun-bleached skin and bone, but there was a faint smile on his lips. Qais, the son of Sa'ad, the man who became Majnun, was dead. The news spread like wildfire. The poet of the eternal love had followed his muse. Sa'ad, his pain tempered by the knowledge that his son was finally at peace, buried Majnun next to Layla, ensuring that in death, the two lovers who were separated by the cruel laws of life and custom would rest side by side.